What up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of The Rose Show. As always, I am your host, Jay. Who else but me? And today, oh man, I'm excited about today. Ken Anderson is my guest. It is episode 10, which officially makes this the longest running project like this I've done in my life. I've started, I think, 4 other projects before this, and it just kind of fizzled out. I think, honestly, by like episode 6. So I think I broke my streak 4 weeks ago or however long it's been at this point. But it's not necessarily that I've quit because I got tired of the work. If you know me, I don't mind putting in work for projects that I care about, but I don't know. I lost interest, which is why I waited so long before starting this project, was because I wanted to make sure it was something I was going to stick with. And obviously we're 10 episodes in, so I've stuck with it this far. Let's see how much longer I can go. Hopefully 100 episodes, 200 episodes. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, thank you. If you've been here the whole time, I appreciate it. Or if this is your first run with the show, either way it goes, I appreciate it. Hopefully you like what you see. And one quick thing, and then I'll get into today's episode. We actually had to record this in a span of 2 days. Me and Ken Anderson did, because we have some technical issues that were going on. We started to record about the first, I think, 10 minutes or so one day, and then the very next day we had to record the rest. So the reason why I bring this up is because you're going to see what's going to look like a wardrobe change almost. Ken actually is wearing 2 different shirts in this episode, and he actually, when we started to record this, he was like, dude, should I change back into my shirt from yesterday? I'm like, no, it's fine. My audience isn't going to care, but I at least wanted to put it up front. So if you're watching the video version of this on YouTube or Spotify, you're going to see, obviously, like I said, a wardrobe change, and I wanted people to be like, what the fuck? Yeah, nothing's wrong with your phone. It's 100% on our end. So anyway, now a word from my sponsor, and then let's get to said episode. All right, everybody, it's time to stop and let you know about today's sponsor of the show, Crazy Martin's in Piqua, Ohio, one of my favorite places in the entire world to go to. Crazy Martin's has provided their customers with quality products for over 20 years, from ashtrays to water pipes and everything in between. Stop in, check out their selection, and of course, check out their pinball machines. With over 20 pins to choose from, there is something for everyone. Crazy since 1996. I don't just say this about every place. I love going to Crazy Martin's. I've always loved going to Crazy Martin's ever since I was of age to go to Crazy Martin's. It's one of my favorite places in the entire world. Me and my wife go there almost every Sunday to play pinball machines. It is one of the funnest spots in Ohio you could possibly find. It is in Piqua, Ohio. Check out their website at www.crazymartins.com. Hello, everybody. What is going on? Welcome to another episode of The Rose Show. I am, as always, your host, Jay. Who else but me? Now, this is normally the part of the show where I give an introduction. However, I do have to point out that this is probably the first time I'm going to do an introduction, and no matter how well I do, my guest could do better than me, but I'm going to give it my best no matter what. My guest today is a 2-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion, former United States Champion, former Mr. Money in the Bank, and my personal top 3 mic skill workers of all time, Ken Anderson. My man, how you doing this evening, brother?
I'm good, thank you. That was an amazing introduction. I appreciate it.
Hey, well, that's high praise coming from the man. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I kind of want to get your background today as a longtime fan of yours. I'm not really big on shoot interviews, but I like doing them because I know I can do it correctly and without all the extra BS. So I kind of want to start with your background and how you got your entry into the wrestling business.
First things first, that's a great shirt you got on there.
We will revisit this here in a little bit.
I had a somewhat normal, albeit fucked up childhood. I was in a situation where my mother was single. My dad wasn't in the picture. It's interesting because he was out of the picture until I was about 35 years old. And then we kind of reconnected. And now we're in each other's lives. It's like it never occurred,
Yeah.
I don't hold grudges, but I was raised in a somewhat normal household after my mom got remarried when I was like 5 years old. And I was always into entertainment. Like, I knew that I wanted to be an entertainer. I remember seeing E.T. Somebody asked me the other day what my first movie I recall seeing in the theater was, and I believe it was E.T. And I cried at the end when he went home in the ship. And so, spoiler alert, if anybody hasn't seen E.T. 30, 40 years later.
Right.
And I remember going home and asking my mom, like, how do I do that? How do I I want to be an actor. And she was under the misconception that you just can't, it takes a certain, you got to know the right people. You got to be in the right location. So I was always the guy that would be at parties telling jokes and doing impersonations of my teachers, and much to the dismay of those actual teachers. And then I did some play acting when I was in high school. And when I got out of high school, though, I didn't really want to do college. It just wasn't for me. And so I kind of thought, well, I'm going to go find a job. I just want to find something that I enjoy, and that'll be my life, And I stumbled upon wrestling when I was 21 years old. I always gave my friends a hard time about watching wrestling. What are you guys doing? Like, that stuff's fake, And my buddy just kept at me. And one night he sort of forced my hand and said, we're watching Monday Night Raw tonight. And I just so happened to see this bald-headed gentleman driving a big black pickup truck with a smoking skull in the front of it. And I believe he had a 6-pack of beer on his lap. And just his whole attitude, I was sort of instantly sucked into watching, okay, he's pretty cool. And then I would start watching every week just to see what he would do. And then, well, the Undertaker's kind of cool too. And the whole storyline with him and Kane is really cool. And then slowly but surely, not even slowly, really rapidly, I got sucked into, I was a huge fan. And then I realized, man, I've been missing out on all this stuff for all these years.
Sure. And that was a great era to get sucked into. That's for sure. Because I've been a wrestling fan my entire life. And I'm literally my entire life since my earliest memory in life is actually watching the Big Boss Man on TV. So that's like, but still that era that you were just talking about to I don't care what anyone says, and there's a lot of people online that are younger and weren't there to experience it. There was nothing like it, so that was an excellent time to get involved for sure.
It was just white hot, and
Yeah,
everybody became a wrestling fan. There were people. I'm proof positive of that, And then there were tons of other people who just started watching and thinking, okay, I get it. It's not supposed to be taken too seriously, for the
yeah,
most part, Like the
yeah.
the cheese factor is actually some of its allure.
Yeah, sure. So did you always have a natural charisma about you? Because there's very few wrestlers, like I said in the intro of this, in my honest opinion, I think you're top three in my ranking system, you're top three on the mic, only behind Stone Cold and The Rock. That's my personal opinion. Did you always have that natural charisma growing up? I know you said you did a little bit of play work in school. Did all that kind of come naturally for you?
Yeah, I think so. I remember being in high school and taking a trigonometry class, and the trig teacher would always give us like a little daily lesson that took about 5 minutes on the board. And then he would allow us to push our desks together and work together. And then we were supposed to work on trigonometry, but I would always end up telling jokes and doing impersonations. And like, there was a bully and the school principal, and I would have little skits of them talking to each other, going deer hunting. And so that's, I would say, a majority of my time in high school. I was more interested in goofing off than I didn't learn anything when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just something that was sort of naturally there from the time I was young. I remember I got in trouble in 7th grade and I was going to get expelled from school. Not expelled, I was going to get suspended, or the school, she was the teacher that was in charge of doing the play for that year, right? Like the coach
Yeah.
or whatever for the plays. She went in and she spoke to the principal and said, if I can get him to do this play, will you? And he agreed to it. So she said, you're either getting suspended and you're going to be in this kind of trouble, or you can try out for this play. And I auditioned for it and I got the lead role, and which meant that I had to sing. I wasn't a singer. I had to sing like 8 solos during this play, which was just crazy, but it was something that I kind of took to right away.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. So how did you mentioned that, you got heavy into wrestling, late 90s, Stone Cold was a big influence on you. How did you eventually make that first step into training?
I was at a party one night and we were talking about wrestling, as it always, every conversation somehow always went towards wrestling at that time. We started talking wrestling and somebody said, hey, I know somebody. I work with the lady whose son is a pro wrestler. Like, he has a wrestling school. And I just couldn't believe my ears. It never even dawned on me, like, how do these guys get to do this stuff? And so I went home that night and I looked up. Google wasn't even a thing. I don't remember what it was. It was like AOL.com, the dial-up.
Probably at that time, Yahoo was the real big one on that one.
Yeah, it was something like that, or Ask Jeeves or something maybe, or it was. And I looked up wrestling schools and I remember thinking, there's no way that Green Bay or Two Rivers, Wisconsin, or, there's no way that there's going to be a wrestling school anywhere near me. So I thought, I'm going to have to go with one of the big 3, Chicago, New York, or LA. And so I looked up schools in Chicago, because Chicago was about a 3.5-hour drive from me. I figured, worst case scenario, like, maybe I can travel down there on my weekends off, because I worked every other weekend. I could travel down there on my weekends off. I could sleep in my car if I need to and go train. And I got in touch with a wrestling promoter that was in the Chicagoland area, and he didn't even call me back. He just dumped my number over to a guy who was starting up a wrestling school in Green Bay. And I called him. I talked to him. I remember he asked me, like, what I thought about Ric Flair and Bret Hart, and I was like, I've heard those names before, but I really don't know who they are. And later on, he told me, years later, he said, like, when I had that conversation with him, he thought, there's no way that this guy is gonna make it. So it was, I believe it was $120 to do a tryout. And I went and I tried out in this little 16-foot ring, and it had, like, the ropes were floppy, saggy. There were patches of, like, duct tape on the canvas and spots of blood and all kinds of stuff. It was hard as a rock too. It was like bumping on concrete. And I remember stepping into that ring for the first time and just feeling, I don't know, it was different. I got goosebumps and I was like, this is it. I'm going to do this. And then it was shortly thereafter where, my trainers were very down to earth, and they said, like, look, it's hard to get in. Your chances of success in this business are less than, like, you have a better shot at making it in the NFL. Because if you think about it, the NFL hires hundreds of people every year.
Sure.
WWE hires 30, maybe 40, 50 at most at NXT. And then of those 50, how many make it past training? And then as we went along, I realized that, there were ways of reaching out to WWE and WCW at the time, ECW. And I just knew that I was going to have to I wasn't afraid to hear, it sucked, but I wasn't afraid to hear no, or I wasn't afraid to hear nothing at all. And I think the most frustrating part of trying to break into the business is not hearing anything. Wrestlers have a tendency to be flaky, where, and this happened to me several times, and I'm not complaining about these particular individuals, but like Jeff Jarrett and Paul Heyman both said, "Hey, call me. Here's my number." And I spent, the next 6 months trying to get in touch with them. It's just, you get busy. When you're busy, especially when you have a job with one of the major companies, you are on the go constantly. And I don't think that either one of those people intended to just leave me hanging. It just happened to be the way that it was. So, I wasn't afraid to hear no. I wasn't afraid to, and interestingly enough, my very first tape that I sent out, we used to send tapes. I got the number, or I got the address for WWE inside. There was a wrestling magazine that came out every year. It was like PW Insider or something like that, that had an edition that they came out with every year that had all the addresses and phone numbers and contact information for all the promotions in the country. And that went for, like, the first page was WWE and it had their address. So I thought, screw it. I remember asking people that were around me in the business about sending this tape. And I remember hearing, like, don't do it. Don't do it, because you're going to send a tape and they're going to see that you're green and it's not going to go well. And I just thought, no, if I send a tape and I'm green, they'll see that. And then when I send another tape a year from now and they'll see improvement, I just thought, and that's the mentality that I went with. And my very first tape I sent, Kevin Kelly responded to me. He was in charge of bringing in extras for WWE. Say, hey, I got your tape. I liked it. And he booked me for a Raw and SmackDown as an extra, which I went and I did nothing. But I got to get in the ring for a little bit during that day. I got to, sit around ringside and listen to criticism of other people, and got to learn a thing or two. Got to eat catering with, like, at one point I'm standing in line to get catering and Steve Austin is standing in front of me. It was just kind of crazy. And I just kept sending tapes. And then I would also call every time I saw the WWE was going to be local. I mean, like, local, I mean, a 15-hour drive was local for me. I didn't care. I was willing to do it. I would call and ask, hey, I see you guys are going to be in such and such. Can I do extra work? And a lot of times it was no, because we already use, like, whenever they were in the St. Louis area, it was like, we use Harley's guys. And there were a couple different wrestling schools at the time, but eventually I got booked again and again and again. And then I started having dark matches. My first dark match ever with that company was against S.A. Rios. And I was only like 1 year into the business. If you watch the match, it's absolutely atrocious. But again, I think, hey, it was the shits. And then a year later, I sent them another tape. And then a year later, I got another opportunity for a dark match. And my dark match was a little bit better. And then, it was 5.5 years of doing that. And then I finally, all the stars aligned. I'd made, and it was a combination of Arn Anderson, Paul Heyman, and Tommy Dreamer that all sort of went to bat for me simultaneously. And Dreamer called me up one day and said, hey, I got you a job.
Well, and to be fair about your dark match, nobody, I think, in the history of fandom of wrestling or wrestlers themselves have ever said, hey, you really got to go check out that S.A. Rios match. I mean, I remember him very clearly. And I mean, no disrespect to the guy. I'm sure he's a great dude, but there's nothing about his career that really pops out of my head other than he was brought in with Lita. That's the only thing I remember from that time frame. But regardless, go ahead.
Just work him about 2 years ago. I worked him in Puerto Rico. I went down and I worked for a company, and it was kind of cool to, I think that was the first time I wrestled him was probably in 2002 to, it was like 2020. I think it was right before the pandemic. So it was like
wow.
Yeah.
Nice. Hell yeah. Well, before we start getting into the actual creation of the Mr. Kennedy character, I'm going to take this moment and take the opportunity I have to talk to you. I have always wanted to share this with you. My first time seeing you was actually at it was on a pay-per-view. I obviously was with some friends and bought it. It was Armageddon 2006. Now, why this pay-per-view was an important part of my life. 2 months prior to that, my oldest sister actually was killed in a car crash.
Mm.
And she was actually married a month before she died. So it was like a terrible, terrible moment in my life. It was the first real tragedy that I ever experienced as a young adult. I was 20 years old. So it was the first time where, life had completely turned upside down. I hadn't left, I was still living with my mom at the time. I hadn't left a single night because I was terrified of her being alone, losing a child like that.
Sure.
And a couple months later, and again, I've always been a huge wrestling fan, but a couple months later, December rolled around and my friends had kept bugging me like, man, you've got to get out of this house. You've got to get out of this house. Eventually, they called me and said, hey, we're going to get this pay-per-view. I was like, okay, I haven't watched wrestling in about 2 months because everything that was happening, I don't know what's going on. We didn't have cable at the time, so I wasn't familiar what was going on with SmackDown anyway, and that was at the time period where it was branded, Raw pay-per-view, SmackDown pay-per-views, and we didn't get UPN, so I had no idea what was going on. But I was like, okay. Even my mom was like, go get out of the house for a little bit. I said, okay, fine, cool. So I was mentally exhausted at that point trying to watch this pay per view, and I found myself kind of nodding off as it was going on. And if you remember, that was the pay per view with the infamous Joey Mercury spot where the ladder goes bam and hits him in the head.
Yeah.
And I remember that spot very clearly, obviously not because of how brutal it was, but I'm literally like about ready to pass out, and my eyes look up and I see the ladder hit him, and I go, oh, and I wake up like immediately at that point, like because it was such a gruesome hit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I was wide awake at that point. But again, that was the first time I had heard your name before, the Mr. Kennedy name before, because the only time I was really getting updates on wrestling was through the internet. So I'd heard your name, I'd seen your pictures, but I'd never seen you work. And you had a match that night with The Undertaker. It was the last ride match.
Mhm.
And you cut a promo at the beginning of that. And that was my very first time seeing you. And immediately I identified with your character, and it fully pulled me back into wanting to be in wrestling at such a terrible time because I'm always drawn to, and I said this in the Eric Bischoff episode as well, I'm a natural heel. So I naturally draw to the heel characters, and your overall charisma, how you carried yourself in that promo, all the above literally pulled me back in to the wrestling industry. And I became enamored with the Mr. Kennedy character to the point where it literally became my personality. I watched everything you did. Um, I thought I told anybody that would listen, this guy's going to be world champion someday. And people thought I was crazy for the most part, but I was telling
You
everyone,
were right.
this guy has got it, and I literally latched up that character got me through the absolute worst time period of my life. And here's actually a picture with me and my nephew from 2007 wearing the Mr. Kennedy shirt that was out at that time frame.
Wow.
And I don't know where that shirt went. I hope it's still at my mom's somewhere because it just kind of disappeared. But that shirt, seeing that shirt reminds me not only of such a terrible time frame, but how much that character, the Mr. Kennedy character, meant to me. So I just want to take this moment and say thank you for your work, especially around that time frame. It literally pulled me through the worst time of my life. And
Wow,
like I
man.
said, I don't really have any follow-up questions to that. I just always wanted the opportunity to say that to you. So
I really
if you ever wonder if your work matters, it matters to it does.
wow, man. That's like
Um
one of the coolest stories I've ever heard. Like I don't know, man. I'm just me. So to hear people say stuff like that is kind of crazy. But I'm sorry everything you went through. I know it sucks, but I'm glad I was able to have like a small part in pulling you out of that abyss.
yeah,
When you
absolutely.
said when you said that I cut a promo at the beginning, was it the one where I was sitting in front of a black? It was like a black background, wearing a black shirt. It was just a
No, you actually went out into the crowd and did the infamous mic, like
Okay.
you always do. It was one of those.
Okay.
I wish I could remember. I actually just watched it a couple days ago to refresh myself. I don't remember. I think it was just a generic "I'm going to win this."
Okay.
But what was specific about that promo was it was obviously during the beginning stages of that character, and you gave it your all when you went back with the second Kennedy. I mean, it was coming from the throat and just obnoxious and in your face. And again, that's what I'm drawn to. I was the Edge rated R superstar character was at before got hit with your work. I was really into that because of how it was, it's me against the world and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it. Well, when it came back around the time where you got in, he was no longer doing that. So I didn't really have it was the La Familia and the Vicky Guerrero. That was all that what was going on. So I had kind of lost the one character that I latched on to the hardest. And before that, it was Triple H during the Evolution era, just because again, he was a prick and I love heels. So when you came along, I was like, oh, this is it. This is my guy. It didn't matter if it was a video game. I bought every piece, even the wristbands, the Mr. Kennedy wristbands, whatever they put out that had your name on it.
Yeah.
I was all about it. So it was a very important character in my life. And I totally understand what you're saying. You're just you, but that's what makes it that much better to me. So while we're on that topic, as far as the Mr. Kennedy character goes, when it came to the creation of the character, was it kind of you told you this is who you're going to be? Did you have input into that character? How was the Mr. Kennedy character developed?
When I, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard, and it was just a generic sort of interview that Steve Austin did, where he just said the best characters are just extensions of one's own personality, with the volume turned all the way up. And I remember when I was just breaking into the business, and I was sort of trying to figure out like who I was going to be as a character, and I was tossing around all these different ideas. And I remember I was at a friend's house one day. I had been dating this woman, and we broke up. And like the day or two after we broke up, I found out that she was hanging out and spending some quality time with somebody who had been a really good friend of mine, right?
Mm.
And I remember I called him. I was at my trainer's house, and there was probably 5 other wrestlers there just kind of hanging out. And I called this guy, and I was just chewing him out on the phone and cutting a promo on him. And the stuff that I was saying, my friends were all like, they were rolling around laughing. And I remember I hung up the phone, and Eric Hammers, my trainer, said, if you ever have a question about who your character is in wrestling, that's it right there. And so from that point forward, it was just me with the volume turned up. And luckily, I came into the WWE at a time when Paul Heyman came through OVW. He was the one that came up with the idea. Go out there, cut the ring announcer off, chew him up and down, spit him out, and then do your own introduction. And I did, and I just added the last name twice at the very end of it. And it was something that I didn't plan on doing. It was just when I was in the moment, I was up in the corner. And I remember I used to announce basketball games in high school, and I used to do that. So I just hit the last name twice, and 5 weeks later, I was on TV. I was making my debut. So, and at the
Nice.
time, it was Tommy called me up one day. Again, I had been at OVW for 7 months, just kind of trying to figure out, kind of treading water. And he said, well, when you come up, they want you to do your gimmick. They want to hear it. They want to see it. And so I did, and it went well. And it was interesting because I went backstage, and everybody from the people that work their camera crew to the people in the truck to the producers to all the wrestlers, like John Cena's running around yelling "Mister." So it was really cool. And Vince told me early on, because I would go up to him and I would say, what do you want me to say? Is there something you want me to say in this promo? And he just said, nope, just go out there and get over. Just be you, which was a really cool thing to experience, where I had entire creative freedom when I first Probably my first 10 or 20 promos that I cut in that company were all just stuff that I came up with.
Yeah. I want anybody, I made a pretty bold statement at the beginning of this episode, and I stand by it even right now as we speak. I want anybody to go back and look at this man's work on the mic. The charisma that you gave off with that character to this day, unmatched, especially in the early days. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, speaking of promos, I wanted to ask you something, and I don't want to touch too much on the negative side of it, just kind of how you feel now on it. Because again, I don't really do the whole negative thing, but in TNA, and we'll
The
talk about
dumbest
your
thing I've
TNA
ever done.
run.
The
Go
dumbest
ahead.
thing I've ever done. I know what you're going to say. And go ahead, say it.
Maybe, perhaps. We'll get here. Okay, so in TNA, we're going to get into your TNA run a little bit more here in a little bit, hence the shirt. But you referenced a promo about where you said Triple H was behind kind of cutting down that character towards the end of your run in WWE and going to Vince and saying, hey, you should really cut this out and this doesn't work here. Or looking back on it now, the time has passed. And again, we don't need to visit the negative
Sure.
connotation of all that. But do you still kind of feel that way? And I'm sure you probably don't hold a grudge either which way it goes. But with so much time has passed, do you still feel like that's how it went down?
No. And I've said this before. It took me a really long time because for years I had a huge chip on my shoulder and I blamed other people for
Sure.
my demise. And I really wasn't doing the work. I wasn't doing what I needed to be doing behind the scenes. And I can blame, even if, let's say it was true that a couple people went to Vince and said, you should get rid of him or whatever, said these negative things. Had I been doing the work behind the scenes, had I been keeping my nose clean, it wouldn't have mattered. Like they would have said those things and Vince would have said, like, shut the fuck up. And instead, he was like, you got a point. And I think, at the time, he was just tired of hearing my name in a negative light. And so, no. And then when I was in TNA, I never wanted to do that promo, by the way. This was Vince Russo was writing at the time, and he handed me a script, and it was very, shooty. I was shooting on the other company, and as much as at the time, I honestly, if anybody asked me, and I meant this from like my soul, I did not ever want to work for that company again. That was just, but I still didn't want to like blow the bridge completely up.
Sure.
And I went out and I softened it quite a bit. And at TNA, I got a ton of creative freedom as well. So they never really we never rehearsed it or anything like that. I went out there and I cut the promo. I came back to the curtain. Vince was like, bro, that's not what I needed. That's not what I wanted. He's like, I wanted you to fucking go out there and shoot from the hip. And, he kind of hyped me up a little bit and said some things that got me fired up. And he was like, I need you to go back out there and cut that promo again. And so I ended up, it's obviously it was a tape show. So I just went out, and normally everything we do is one take. But I just said, if I go out there and I cut this same promo and I pretend like this other one never happened, they're going to shit all over it. Yeah. So I just said, how about if I go out there and I just admit, hey, sometimes we need, sometimes this is film. It's being taped for TV. Sometimes we have to do a take two, and this is take two. So, and then everybody seemed to be like, it was almost like I was letting them in. So they actually responded appropriately. But yeah, I went out and I said those things, and I don't know. I wish I hadn't have done it. I really wish I would have stuck to my guns, and but it is what it is. And but no, it's definitely, I was responsible for my downfall in that company, 100%. Nobody else. There's nobody else.
Much respect. Much respect for you going back and doing a retro look at that. A lot of people have problems with doing that. So literally, much respect to you. So like I said, let's get into your time at TNA here in a little bit. Before you got into the TNA, I did know that. Well, actually, let me back up. you ended up doing an Australian tour with Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff. I didn't know that till recently. I'm a big fan of 83 Weeks, and I listened to the episode where he talked about your guys' trip over there.
Mhm.
How was your experience going over there? Because from an actual management side, like Eric Bischoff and what he had to deal with, he didn't have a whole lot of glowing things to say about it. Because again, he had to deal with the promoters and all that jazz. From an talent perspective, how was it like doing that tour? Was it pretty fun?
It was the most fun that I had ever had on a professional
Wow,
wrestling excursion or a tour. No, normally when we were in WWE, even Impact, when TNA was going over there doing any international stuff, you're just one city to the next to the next. Every night it's a different city. So I mean, a different country really. Like you'll be in Scotland one night, and England the next night, and France the next night, and Italy the next night,
sure,
and you just keep going. So you never really have much chance to even look at anything. You see the world. You're visiting all these cool places, and you see the inside of a bus, inside of a
yeah,
hotel room, inside of an arena. That's about it. Um, but we at the time, I think we did four. It was either 4 or 5 dates, and it was uh, every day we would go, we would have 2 or 3 days off after, just in the same city, and we didn't have anything to do, and we were making pretty good money at the time. The tour was, it paid very well, and I was just coming off WWE, so we had fun, and the boys hung out by the pool all day long on those days off, and we went out at night, and it was, yeah, like I said, it was the most fun. And then I got to start a relationship with Hogan and Bischoff at that point, and they really were the reason why I ended up getting a job in TNA in the first place. Like they were the ones that went to bat for me. And the thing was, is like, even though they went to bat for me, I still had to, like, it was almost like I was starting over from square. I did not get a great contract my first year in TNA. I had to earn that, and then we renegotiated for the next several years. But that was a cool trip.
yeah. And I totally get what you're saying. You can see behind me, this wall is a bunch of tour passes. Same thing with this right here. I was in a band until COVID hit. We were called Menace to Sobriety. We traveled all around the country. And if people talk to me all the time about the traveling of being in a touring band, like, oh, you must have seen a lot of cool stuff. And I always give them the exact same answer. No, I've seen a lot of cool exits. I've seen a lot of cool parking lots of venues. You're not, people have this idea of what it's like touring. No, 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 no. You get to see what's at the venue.
Yep.
All around it, you're not seeing anything else. So yeah, I totally get that. Yeah.
There were times when we would be on a tour with, say, WWE, where it'd be like our fourth day. I remember I had been to Rome a few times before. We had a couple hours of downtime during the day, and it was like, you can either sleep or a bunch of us are going over to the Coliseum. I gotta do the Coliseum, So like, I've got this great picture of me and like 10 other guys over touring the Coliseum. But that was kind of, you had to pick and choose. You couldn't do that every day because you had to sleep.
Right. So you build this relationship with Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan. You end up signing the deal. You go to TNA. I was actually, of course, rumors are going to be rumors, and when the mystery opponent for Abyss was being announced, me being a huge Mr. Anderson mark, I'm like, I'm going to watch. So I bought the TNA pay-per-view. It was Genesis, and of course, you come out, and what intrigued me, and I still remember this to this day. You do your promo, and you get to the point where you go, Mister, and you tease like you're going to say Kennedy. So you're acknowledging, the character. Was there ever a point during your run in TNA where WWE was like, that's a little bit close to what we built? Because if you go back in history, they did the same thing to Scott Hall in WCW, where it was confusingly similar. Did a confusingly similar situation ever pop up in TNA? Because I mean, it really was the same character, even though it was you.
No, and I never really. That was as close as I ever got to going there. Cut. That was as close as I ever got. And in fact, Tommy Dreamer at one point said, like, do it. Just I would be on a house show and he would like say the name and then change it. That's what people know you as, like, acknowledge it. And I started doing it, but and he said, like, if they don't want you to do it, they'll give you a cease and desist, and then you just stop. So, but that never happened.
Speaking of the house show circuit in TNA, I want to bring up the shirt. I got this shirt. I think it was in 2011. Here's a picture. I met you in Troy, Ohio at a TNA house show. And this picture right here is the exact same shirt I have on my back right now. Nice. I've kept it ever since. Like I said, I lost the original Mr. Kennedy shirt. I was not going to lose this one. So I've held on to it all this time later. Like I said, I think it was 2011. So it's been about 13 years. There's a spot that you did where in the arena, you go to reach for the microphone. And in Troy, Ohio, there ain't no microphone coming from the ceiling. So what you do instead is you kind of went from this side, went over to this side of the ring, go back over to this side of the ring, and then you look at Borash and go, where's my microphone? Was that a normal spot you did at little rink-a-dink arenas like the one here in Troy, Ohio?
Yeah, I still do it to this day. Especially if I'm in front of an audience that's never seen me before live, I'll do that. Because most people do not take the time. It's a big hassle to hang that microphone. Really. The weight usually the weight of the microphone, it's not heavy enough, so it gets hung up on the pulley, and it has to be weighted just perfectly. It's a big. I know it was a big deal for like WWE to fly it at TV, but I don't believe they flew it at house shows. I think I started doing that when I was in WWE.
Oh, wow. That's very cool. All right. Did you ever have any instances with major malfunction using that microphone? Because when that thing drops, it's coming at you, it looks like. Did it ever get to a point where you might have missed it, or maybe it hit you in the head on the way down, or were you lucky to avoid that altogether?
I missed it a couple times. There's a funny blooper somewhere out there on the inner tube of that thing coming down, and after a while, especially I became friends with the crew guys. They would fuck with me every once in a while and like drop it. So I'd be standing there and it would be like a foot too high. Sometimes they would drop it really, really fast. Sometimes they drop it slow. So yeah, there's one where it's coming down really hot and I missed it and it starts swinging back and forth. And I think I said I meant to do that. And I always felt like in situations like that, if you screw something up, you have to acknowledge it.
Sure.
Perfect. If you don't, they saw the screw up. The people they're gonna crucify you if you try to pretend like it didn't happen. And case in point, WrestleMania a couple of years ago, Batista, it was his last match, and as he was getting up onto the ring, he slipped. Do you remember this?
Yes, I do. Yep.
He slipped, and instead of just forgetting about it, he took another lap and made a big production out of it. And it ended up, it saved it.
So, okay, TNA, you make your debut, things start get cooking. How did it get to the point where you became world champion? Because I think everybody knew, and I don't mean this to be insulting. I was a huge TNA fan. I'm so glad they're going back to the letters TNA because I think there's so much history in that actual, the branding of TNA. But during that era, let's be honest, it's kind of like AEW today. If you're a big enough name in WWE, they're gonna give you the belt. It was just the way. I mean, Mick Foley at that point in time ended up getting, a chance with the heavyweight championship.
Sure.
But I think everyone, when you came in, everyone knew, oh yeah, he's gonna get it. But he earned it. The way that you exited the WWE with the contract and all that jazz. Everyone knew you had already earned your spot from the fans' perspective anyway. Not speaking for you or anyone else backstage, but from the fan perspective, we all felt like, yeah, he's going to get it, but this is one that we're going to go along with. How did you eventually get to that point where, they came to you and said, hey, we're putting the strap on you?
I don't even remember, honestly.
Okay.
I was always in that mix of, top guys in the company, and I guess it was just the right time. And then, looking back on it, I cannot believe how I handled it. And they quickly removed it from me for this reason. But I remember doing an interview. I won the world championship at TNA, and then I went and did an interview, and I said something like, wrestling is kind of crazy because people backstab each other backstage over this toy belt or something like that, and like within a week or two, they took it off me. Yeah. So, but I really don't remember, the buildup. I think I took it off. Did I take it off Jeff Hardy the first time?
I believe so. Yeah, because the promo that I was referring to earlier, you still had the Jeff Hardy title at that time.
Yeah, and I remember just the Eric Bischoff laid out that whole, if you watch that whole sequence, they really, really put me over. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I took a lot of abuse from a lot of different people, and I still ended up winning. So it was a cool feeling, a very cool reaction. I don't know. I like telling stories, and anytime, whether I'm winning or losing, the most fun I've ever had in the business was losing sometimes, because you have this idea like, oh, they'll bite on this, or hopefully this will get a reaction. And then when it happens, it's just so magical. That's the drug. That's the thing that people are addicted to when it comes to not being able to exit the business, or why people don't want to.
Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I have I take exception to the overall fan notion of, oh, if they don't have a world title, then they're irrelevant. That has been, I think, in the last 10 years, one of the biggest downfalls of fandom. Everyone thinks you have to have a title to be in an important story. Not at all. You go back and look at guys like Mr. Perfect. I mean, granted, you could say the AWA World Championship, but I don't, whatever. That is what it is. But he never got one of the big two. He never needed the big two. Why? Because he was a good enough worker and he was good enough on the mic that you didn't need that. There are so many examples like that. I mean, you could say the same thing about Scott Hall. Scott Hall never won the big one, never needed to. And in some cases, you get remembered for it for the wrong reason, like a Kevin Nash. His WWF World Championship run ain't looked on that great. He didn't need it. I think that's a big thing. You hit the nail on the head right there. Absolutely. It's the story is what matters.
Do they say yay when you want them to say yay, and do they boo when you want them to boo? If so, we're golden. That's the dream. It's the most satisfying part of this job is, like I said, laying it out backstage and going like, I think they'll bite on this, and then having it happen is it's a good feeling.
For sure. So what's the story behind the asshole logo? Because this again, natural heel. I saw this shirt within a day. It was ordered. It definitely pulled me in.
So this is an interesting story, actually, I think, because it's one of my biggest regrets in the business is the buildup to that. So when I was at OVW, I came up with I think I was on my way to OVW, and I was like, nice guys finish last. That was kind of my tagline, but I didn't have a finish to it. And I came up with, nice guys finish last. Thank God I'm an asshole. And so when I got to OVW, whenever we would do promos in class, I would always hit that somewhere in there. That would be my tagline. And, it was well received amongst the boys at OVW, which is always, to me, that's a good test, because we're cynical. We've seen everything. If they're reacting to it, there's probably a good chance, high likelihood that the fans will react to it. So when I got called up onto the active roster, I remember Vince asking me, do you have any catchphrases or anything like that? And I told him, I was like, nice guys finish last. Thank God I'm an asshole. And he was like, I remember this. It was my third week, and I was just, I had debuted as Mr. Anderson on Velocity. And then I think I worked a local guy. I squashed a local guy. as Mr. Anderson. And the third week, Johnny Ace came and said, "Hey, they want you to change your name." And I had a meeting with Vince, Stephanie, Kevin Dunn, Johnny. We all sat in Vince's office on folding chairs. The five of us sat down, and Vince was just like grilling me. And he's like, "Do you have any catchphrases?" I told him that one, and he goes, "Wow, we can't do that." They had just gone to, it wasn't like hardcore PG like it became, but it was, we can't do that. We can't say that. So and then I remember Johnny Ace going like, "Well, maybe there's a way around it, a creative way around it. Maybe you could say your name is like Adam Hole. So you could say, 'Nice guys finish last. Thank God I'm an a-hole.'" And you're, and then I remember like Vince, it was just some silence for a moment, and he looked at Johnny, and then he looked at me, and he goes, "What do you think about that?" And I was like, "It's funny. It's funny." But I said, with all due respect, I feel like that would be very gimmicky and something that would just be somebody that was here for a couple weeks or a couple months and then gone. And then so that was scrapped. So then fast forward to, I'm going to win Money in the Bank. And I remember Michael Hayes came up to me during the day, and he goes, "Hey, they want you to cut a promo after you win. And I want you to look at this like your Austin 316 moment." That Austin 316 moment being when Austin 316 was born at the King of the Ring tournament. So that was his idea. He was like, and I like, if ever there was a spot to hit that, it would be there. So I was planning on doing it. I was planning on having that be my out. Thank God I'm an, nice guys finish last. Thank God I'm an asshole, and walking off. And for whatever reason, because Vince had said no to me before, I thought I better ask. And so as soon as I asked, I instantly regretted it. And of course they said, no, you can't do that. Even though it's WrestleMania, like it's not TV. I could have gotten away with it. And it was one of those things where like, I wish that I had just done it. And worst case scenario, ask for forgiveness afterwards.
Right. Yeah.
Because I always had this idea that, there was a time where when Mr. McMahon would go out, people would chant "asshole, asshole." And I remember thinking, like, what if it was a positive? What if that was like asshole, asshole? And, a lot of times when people have an idea, a creative idea in their heads, and you try to explain it to others, they just don't get it. And it's a no. And I always tell my students, like, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. And that was one of those cases. And then so fast forward to, I'm in TNA, and I had the creative control. I hit it. And then the next week, Vince Russo had started writing that in for me. And I believe it was a promo with Jeff Hardy where I said, Jeff Hardy's got his fans. He calls them creatures of the night. Well, I've got my fans. I call them Anderson's assholes. And it was like instantly the crowd started chanting, "We are assholes." And had I had the WWE marketing machine behind that particular, so.
Yeah. Obviously it worked to some people, and more than not, for sure. Especially for me, because again, like I keep referring to, natural heel, right? I've calmed down quite a bit, and a couple people who are watching this and know me personally, know me from back then. I would tell you who you are, what you are, and everything about it at that point in time. And so I would wear this shirt, not just because it was your shirt, but it was like a warning. So people thought it was, again, not who I am, now by a long shot, but back then I was just full force, and this was kind of call to action to me. So that's really cool to hear.
I'm a big fan of, like, not everybody. There were a lot of wrestling shirts that I would see and go, I would never wear that. It's a cool shirt, it's a cool picture, but I would never wear that. I like to have conversation starters. Like my other shirts, "Pro Wrestling is Real" on the front. people are fake on the back. Conversation starter, even if you're not a wrestling fan. Oh, I get it. So
Yeah.
that was kind of my idea. Like, and I know there's tons of people out there who are not wrestling fans who consider themselves asshole, who proudly wear that. So that was my idea. Was I wanted to, I want to appeal to everybody, not just a niche audience.
Yeah, and you could definitely tell that even in some of your earlier shirts too. Like again, the talk loud, hit harder one, perfect for me. I have to try very hard when I'm doing these to not talk loud. I am notoriously a loud individual, so again, that was a warning on the back. Nice guys finished last. I think everybody can relate to that. That was the picture that I was showed a little bit ago, from the original one. So yeah, that makes a lot of
Hate
sense because a
people.
lot of your sayings that were on the shirt were universal sayings. Absolutely.
I hate people is another one that I've used several
Uh,
times. So
yeah, we're going back and revisiting a lot of your slogans, and a lot of people who know me personally who might not know you are going, oh, that's why he related to him so much because everything we just said, that's me. So as we wind down, is there any kind of obscure matches or obscure moments or any moments throughout your career where you were kind of like, oh yeah, this is one of my favorites that might surprise anyone? Or if not, are there any moments in general that you favor more than the rest?
I don't know if it's obscure, but one of my proudest things or moments that I've ever had was in 2007 getting to be a part of the tribute to the troops going over to Iraq. Um, that was just such a cool experience. Getting to, people are over there in harm's way. Like it sucks. It's 135, 140 degrees over there with the heat index sometimes, and they're wearing full battle rattle. And just to be able to go over there and bring a little slice of home to them was really cool. That was just a fun experience riding. The plane we flew over in was this giant bay. It was a great experience. Another thing was doing the thing with Hornswoggle off the ladder at WrestleMania. That was his idea in the first place. He's a good friend of mine. I kind of, he gives me credit for training him, even though it was just, I'd show him some stuff that I knew before some of the shows that we were booked on together. But just being able to hit him with that thing. And we normally, when you hit somebody with something dangerous, you check on them. But I hit him with it and I wasn't able to check on him right away because I had to go into something else right away. So it's like a couple minutes later, I was able to finally kind of crawl over to him. I was like, you okay, man? And he was like, yeah, dude, I'm good. Just like, he's selling this thing like he got squashed. And he was just like, just having a gay old time, like just having fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, again, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. I appreciate everything. I always say this, even though I already said this kind of once to you again. I always end with anybody I talk to in the business. I always say thank you for your contributions to the business. It's much appreciated from all fans. What you guys do to your bodies, the time away from your family, all that. Thank you so much for being a slice of our memories. It takes a lot for you guys to do that, and I appreciate it. At this point, I always give the last couple of minutes to the guest. If there's anything specifically you like to plug, socials, your school, whatever it might be, floor is yours, my man.
Yeah, just check out my wrestling school. It's theacademysopw.com. If you are interested in getting into the business and you live anywhere near the Twin Cities or you are considering relocating, give me a text. Send me a text. My number is 507-722-2776. That comes directly to me. Most of the time, people reach out to me. They're interested in training, but every once in a while, I'll get a fan that just messages me and says, hey, I just thank you. I appreciate stuff like that. And if anybody doesn't live in the Twin Cities area, but you want to get into the business, I'm cool with, there's some really, I think one of the biggest things when you're thinking about getting into the business is find a good wrestling school. And there are good wrestling schools out there. And, I've helped people before get hooked up with a decent one and a decent trainer. So Yeah, and follow me on all the social medias. Mr. Ken Anderson on Twitter, Mr. Ken Anderson on Instagram. I have the Academy School of Professional Wrestling on Facebook. And I think the Academy SOPW on Twitter and Instagram as well. So
Awesome. Ken, thank you so much for this. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.